All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of XS Exceed. This is Gearface. Very, very excited to be learning about arguably the most sane and normal, stable character on the Exceed roster, Faust, the not the Exceed player from Pennsylvania. That's a different guy. This is Faust, the Guilty Gear character, and here to teach me all about uh, this particular Guilty Gear character is the person who taught me about Faust, the Exceed player from Pennsylvania, D. D, thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're doubling up. We're making sure if they ever make like a Vampire Hunter D custom for Exceed, I'm gonna have to get Faust to teach me him to balance out the scales.
Ah, there you go. Yes, yes.
Um,
It's too much Faust pretty to be more
exactly.
deeper
Yeah.
Faust.
No. Yeah. It's way out of whack right now. Yeah. Really excited about this guy. I don't know a ton about him. But he seems like the kind of character you could have some fun with. So hopefully we will learn a few things. Um, quick disclaimer, as always, before we get started. Number one, we talk about playing to win on this show, and playing to win is not the only way that you can play Exceed. In fact, studies have shown you can play for fun. And I recommend that you do because when you do, you have fun. If these lines of play that we're describing aren't fun, especially for Faust, who, as I mentioned, seems like he's got some fun things that you could do. If the way that we're describing that we should play Faust doesn't align with what you think is fun, play the way that you do think is fun. Um, Number two, we tend to be pretty prescriptive on this show. You're going to hear D say things like always do this, never do that. Usually this is a good idea. Usually this is a bad idea. Take all that with a grain of salt. Exceed's not a solved game. These are the rules to D's strategy for Faust. They don't have to be the rules to your strategy. And if we, especially with a character who is not, technically out in print yet, there's still a lot more room to develop this character. And speaking of not being out in print yet, with the imminent launch, the physical release of season 7 upon us, it occurs to me that we might have some newer people than normal watching. So a couple things I want to mention up front. For one thing, when I say season 7, you might know that as Guilty Gear Strive, the board game. Those two terms are equivalent. There's a couple normals we'll be talking about. Uh, you might know them as Slash and Dust. I will probably slip up and call them Assault and Spike. They are the same normal. There's just a cosmetic difference. But if you are new, welcome to the Exceed community. I hope you enjoy your stay. And if this is the kind of character that you're into, I hope that we can teach you some things. So with all that said, D, tell me a little bit about Faust.
Heck yeah. I'm also going to add one more thing just to the end of that little last note, which is if you have questions or if we say things that are unclear, leave comments. We are always working to improve our ability to communicate,
Yes.
especially because I'm going to say things that will mean nothing to you, and then we'll try to catch them and explain them, because I have a tendency to slip into jargon from having played this game too long.
Yep.
Um,
I,
trying to improve on that, but
I'm only a couple years old in the community at this point, and even I find it infecting me. I think in the speed curve now, D, and I think it's your fault.
Yep. Yeah, on curve, above curve, below curve, all that nonsense.
Yep.
It's infectious because it's useful.
Yes, it is.
All right, let's talk Faust. Again, this Faust. I'm
It's
just gonna
Faust.
make that clear. Yeah,
Yep.
which doesn't require any clarification for people who don't know the other Faust. But um, all right, so this is my favorite grappler who's not a grappler, most likely. Because he uh, I'll explain that a little bit more later, but he does some incredibly fun and tasty things. But to start with, I'm going to explain what he actually does, which is this ability. All right. So you have access to this action, which you can take on your turn when you would take an action. Like you can take this one instead of the prepare or move or walk or change cards, whatever. You can take this action, which is boost to the top card of your deck. Face up, that's just clarification. You can't cancel it. That's because the next thing that's happening is that you're striking. Right at the end there. Strike. So this can do some cool stuff. Right? You're like, all right, I want to strike. I will pull something off the top of my deck. Hey, now I'm drawing an extra card and I have +1 power and I'll get some extra gauge if I hit and I'm still striking.
And
Like
and
it's
and this boost isn't normally cancelable. So
correct.
you're able to do kind of like a pseudo cancel. You're not canceling into anything, but you're canceling into punching somebody. And if you have +1 power, maybe that's kind of what you want anyway.
Exactly. You're
Okay.
not paying a gauge to take another action. You are paying certainty to strike.
Okay.
Because you don't have control over what's on top of your deck. Um, nothing you do is going to give you control over that. You're not 100% guaranteed, and this can be a problem if you're looking at the range you're at. Where's our little there you go, dummy here. And you go, yeah, I'm in a great position. I'm gonna strike, and then this happens, and you're like, pull. That's whatever.
That's not exciting, but
Yep. Or this happens. Well, we're not at range 1 anymore.
now I'm over
Now
here
I'm
and
here.
I really hope whatever I was planning to do still works.
Still works.
Right.
Yeah. We'll put that one back. I may have stacked the deck in the wrong order. Anyway. Um, little secrets here. So it can be awkward. You don't have perfect control over what your ability is going to turn out, but it is also very powerful because it's usually going to turn out good things, especially if you are prepared to deal with it. This is significantly tilted in your favor if you flip out or flip over. Well, flipping out is fine too.
He seems
Spinning
like
2
the
gauge
kind of
60.
guy. He seems like the kind of guy who would flip out occasionally.
He does some. He flips people out,
Yeah,
and yeah,
fair
mostly on
point.
their side of things.
Fair point.
And he will chew you up and spit you out too. That's
Mm-hmm.
quite a. He's got a grab animation. Anyway, so action: reveal the top 2 cards of your deck. Boost with 1, discard the other, and strike. Obviously, this is considerably stronger. Far, far, far better. So now let's see if I did it right this time. Yeah, there you go. You're like, hey, I want to strike in this position. Well, this one would change my position. So no, we're gonna do this one. And by the way, if you're curious about how this interaction works specifically, parry, name a card, the opponent must discard a copy of that card or reveal a hand with none. Cool. You parry, you name something. Then maybe you see your opponent's hand. Then you strike.
Right.
That's pretty
That
cool.
that's an ultra boost. That's an ultra boost on. I think does Noel have that boost?
Look at the opponent's hand and strike. Yeah, Noel has
Yeah,
that. Yep, Nanase has it as a special boost.
yeah.
Not very common.
That's a pretty powerful ability to just throw on a normal for Faust.
Mm-hmm. And this is an action, which means that if you are using the cancel mechanic of Guilty Gear Strive the War game, you can make it a force multiplier. You can do, like, assuming you have gauge, right? You can do things like badass cancel, character ability.
Right, because the character ability
Mhm.
says that you cannot cancel it, but that doesn't mean you can't cancel into it.
Exactly. You can cancel beforehand and
Right.
then end with this as effectively your strike action instead of just striking doing something. Now, there are still times that this can backfire. Maybe you reveal both copies of Ukemi, and the only boost in play is the badass you just played.
Right.
Well, that's the reason I stacked the deck. I've had this happen.
Oh,
I want you to know this can happen. And if you ever assume that you can't be that unlucky, I will sneak into your game and rearrange your deck without you knowing it.
you definitely can be that unlucky.
It can happen. So what all this means is you're capable of throwing the game into chaos at a moment's notice, with some amount of control over that chaos, but most importantly, an uncanny ability to react to that chaos. Your opponents probably, I'm going to say actually certainly, your opponent can't be ready for literally anything that could come off the top of your deck, but you actually can, because your kit is made to be able to respond to anything that comes off the top of your deck.
Okay.
You have some safety valves. And what I mean by that is cards that will probably work no matter what boost you flip. Here we are. These 2 cards in particular, considering that you are initiating the strike at any range from 1 to 4, maybe 1 to 5, depending, but you're probably mostly going to be fighting at 1 to 3 for reasons I'll cover in a minute. Doesn't really matter what boost you flip, these will work. Thrust has a range of 1 to 5. It's speed 3 and guard 4. It's extremely unlikely to get stunned. Your opponent basically has to play dive or certain character-specific normals. Or sorry, specials and ultras, whatever. And any movement is not really going to hurt it because you're going to advance 3, hey, you're still in range. You're going to push 2, hey, you're still in range. You're going to pull 2, hey, you're still in range. You're going to maybe push 1, retreat 1, hey, you're still in range. You could even advance 2, hey, you're still in range.
Even if the
Right.
opponent just plain old regular crosses out, you're still in range. Maybe when
Right.
you combine that with some other movement bonuses that you might not want, where you're retreating as well, it could conceivably happen. But odds are low that you you're going to miss with thrust, even with all of the strangeness that can happen when you boost.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about the roles your attacks play, by the way, and then I'm gonna go over the roles your boosts play because they do serve different roles, and I want to. It's important that you know what movement is left in your deck, so that you know what kind of hand you need to have to be able to accommodate what that movement is.
Okay.
Um, that is it. That is generally a thing where you're going, especially when you're in basic mode before exceeding. I'm gonna make the claim here that you should plan on exceeding because your exceed mode is much stronger than your basic ability,
Just
and it's only 2 gauge.
just for consistency's sake, right? Like giving you the
Right.
ability to select between one of two boosts ups your odds, doubles your odds actually of getting something that maybe it's not something that you want, but at least is something that you can deal with.
Right. The ability to always choose the more useful of the 2 options that are on top of your deck is great. There's also kind of mm, I'm not gonna go into the statistics side of it, but, let's say I think it's generally good to go through your deck faster, especially before you've reshuffled. Um, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Uh, so yeah, fundamentally, it's you're not just beholden to one thing, which might even actually be bad for you in some situations. You have the option of choosing between 2 things, and as long as you still have a hand that can handle any one thing in all likelihood, what that means is you're not at the baseline of, "I have one thing and it's kinda bad for me and I can't do anything about it." I have one thing that I can still deal with because I've cultivated a hand that can deal with any one thing, and then I
Right.
get to decide whether the other thing is better.
Right.
Right? You
And
want your
so
ability not to be, I'm accommodating my problems, I'm dealing with my weaknesses. You want your ability to be, "No, I'm more awesome than you."
right. I'm making something better, and if the best you're getting out of your ability is like I'm glad that my ability didn't shoot me in the foot. That's not a
Mhm.
very good ability, but the ability could
Right.
be something way better than that. And by exceeding, you're dramatically increasing the odds that it is better than that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Exactly. So yeah, several of your boosts are double-edged, right? So when I went through the stacked deck example showing a bunch of boosts, I showed normal boosts. The reason for that is normal boosts are generally good. Um, you can get hurt when you flip Ukemi and you're the only one with the continuous boost in play, and you can get hurt when you flip a movement boost that you weren't prepared for. But other than that, it's all good. Um, oh, right. Sorry, I'm getting out of order. I said, let's talk about the things that make you consistent. These are things that you can be prepared for as long as you have things like this in hand.
Okay.
Stuff that's going to work. This is a range 1 to 4 attack because it has before advance retreat 2. And then it has after advance retreat 2, which means that if your position is really screwed up, you can fix it later. Speed 2 5 guard is extremely unlikely to get stunned as long as you're starting at ranges 1 or 4. At 2 and 3, you're subject to dust. Um, like 2 is in general the range that is weakest for you because of how your kit works. You have a few things that shore up at it, but you're mostly better at going at 1 and at 3, where 3 is where I'm going to explain. Well, 1 and 3 are why I say you're kind of a grappler because you have access to hilarious stuff at 1 and 3. At 4, you're perfectly functional. At 2, you start to realize that these have holes in them that can be kind of awkward.
Right. Now,
Uh,
when
mhm.
when you're talking about thrust and mix, should I mostly be treating them as safety valves, as you said, or are there times when like I'm deliberately setting up something that will go great with thrust? Like I noticed that thrust has a like a +3 power on it that like, hey, that can break sweep. That sounds awesome. Is that the kind of
Mhm.
thing that I wanna be going for, or is it more valuable to treat it as, like, I should keep thrust in my hand in case I pull something bad, rather than, I pulled something that would work great with thrust, I can spend thrust on it?
So so in general, right? A payout this good, a card this strong, and I do think Thrust is a really strong card, and I'll explain more about that in a minute.
Right,
Um, but a card this strong is a thing that you would prefer to spend last to mitigate your problems. You don't want to play Thrust at range 5. It's not very good.
right,
It hits. That's what it does. But if you're in a situation where you just put Let's Rock on the fields, which is the boost on grass that goes to gauge if you hit, well, you need something that hits at range 5. You
right,
have it.
right,
It's a question of investment. So like you will prefer to use thrust when you've made it awesome. Like a badass thrust is one of the scariest things that you can do because it's a speed 4, range 3, lots of defense, hits for 8. Hits for 8.
Yeah.
Just
Hit
yeah.
hits for
Oh,
hits for focus breaking numbers on a special.
yes. At range 3, it doesn't actually hit for 8 against focus, but focus doesn't hit because the pull fails. Again, thrust dynamics. We'll talk about
Right, right.
that. Yeah, your cards are kind of screwy. All of these are a little bit interesting in how they actually work in their dynamics, but thrust is super reliable. You will prefer to use it as a payout card. That's why you would prefer to use Mix 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 as your safety valve coverage card.
Got it. Okay.
But it's what do you have and what are you investing? Um, it's also perfectly fine to do things like play cross even at a range where it doesn't hit, because you are a character who is not really subject to range limitations like most people are. Um, you know, one reason that I can't say Faust is a grappler with a straight face is because if Faust plays cross and retreats to range 4 or greater, he's not sad.
Right. He's not positioning negative the way that Zangief would be or the way that Potemkin would be.
Exactly. Like I talk when I play other grapplers about making sure that you have cross in your hand so you never accidentally wild swing it because you
Right.
don't want to strike with it.
Right,
And
right.
that's not true of Faust. You can back up just fine because well let's skip ahead to this card, which says range yes.
Yeah, that 8 is not a common number that you see on a range or on a before effect in Exceed. So
Yeah,
you
that
you
means you
can
will in fact hit from full screen.
yep, hit the whole board.
Yep. Most people can't see that, which means, by the way, that if you are actually standing this far away, this is just going to hit them and they can't do much about it. And if you have any power in play, it becomes about as silly as thrust is. So like Let's Rock turns this into a 7 power. It's speed 2, it has no defenses, but if they don't have a range 8 attack, who cares?
And many, many, many characters, even like some dedicated zoners. Like New 13 I think has one and it's an ultra or something like that.
Yes, and she only has a few, I think 3 other ways to hit at range 8 using her
Yeah.
ability,
Yeah,
and she's
and
exceptional in that regard.
yeah, and like I mean, Ryu is a terror at range, but his range is 6.
Yep, he does not go up to 7 or 8. He
Right.
stops. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so just the fact that you have options out at this range mean that you can play cross at basically any range and go, yeah, it's fine, right? I still have it's something that I can threaten my opponent with. If they think that they're safe because we're at long range and they're going to spend their time rebuilding, I can put one boost in play, and now they're staring down the barrel of a loaded scarecrow. Um,
Right.
like they don't want that. Um, so this is the reason. This is one of the main reasons that range isn't real. The other is just how much movement you have. Besides how your ability can let you just sort of pop it free, you have extra movement in your kit. In particular, this boost, advance 2, draw 1, or retreat 2, draw 1, depending on which way you need to move, is just very efficient movement. You're basically walking, right? You spin 2 force move 2, but you get an extra card off of it.
And this says because you'll frequently be top decking this when you're boosting, this has a now Strike Rider on it, which is also again, speaking of Ryu, that's an ultra boost. That's
Yeah, yeah,
that's real.
literally.
Lightning Reflex is a notoriously good card or notoriously good boost.
Yep,
You have that, and it draws
you
you one
essentially have that.
and can back you
Yep,
up.
yep. Oh man, but yes, you can have a lot of mobility. You also have the mobility built baked into your attack.
Right.
Mix, which, like I said, follow up stuff. So yeah, range isn't exactly real. So be willing to put yourself in weird positions, especially if they're positions that make the game awkward for both players, because it's always less awkward for you.
Right.
Um, you can always do something. Now, I say always. The big caveat is like if you're 3/4 of the way through your deck and most of your cards are down, well, that's not true anymore. Um,
Right.
at that point, you need to be getting through your deck faster. That's part of the reason I think you, as Faust, like to go through your deck quickly. You want to make sure that you actually hit copies of things. Uh, you'll be very sad if you never see a thrust. It's an incredibly strong card.
Should you be planning to go through should you be planning to reshuffle as Faust, whether or not you're taking the reshuffle action to manually do it? You're just drawing
I
through
think
enough
you should
cards.
be surprised if you don't,
Okay.
because between your ability, your Exceed ability, which is basically burning 2 cards every time you strike,
Yep.
right? Because those come off the top of your deck,
Yep.
and the number of draw effects you have on your boosts. Where did we put that ultra a second ago?
Oh, excellent question.
I vanished into the ether. All right. Whatever. Here's another one. Um, like you have a lot of draw effects. Draw 2, draw 1, draw 2, draw 1. That's not a draw effect. I got confused. Highly professional here. Anyway, uh, it's fairly likely that you're going to reach the bottom of your first deck, so to speak. You'll hit your reshuffle, which actually I guess I should make the clarifying note here that if you have 0 cards in your deck and use your ability, what do you think happens, Gearface?
Because you're making the clarification, I'm gonna guess it does. I'm gonna get. Wait, hold on, wait. It's a reveal effect. You're not drawing. You don't get anything.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. You declare your
Yes.
ability, you do nothing, and then you strike.
I learned something. I'm 40 guides. By the way, this is my 40th guide that I've recorded for this. I've learned a thing about Exceed. Reveal effects do not reshuffle.
That's correct. Yes. If it was a draw effect, it would.
Yep.
So if you hit one of these on your last card, then you'll draw and you'll pop your reshuffle and on you go.
Yep.
But yes, just something that looks at or reveals top card of your deck, it does not do it, or discards it for that matter. So yes, if you have 0 cards in deck, don't use your ability, unless you're just taking the strike action, I guess. Yeah, you'll probably pop an automatic reshuffle through some effect because of how many cards you tend to draw,
right?
And then you can race through your second deck to try to kill your opponent.
So whether or not you are you're playing your cards like a rushdown character would, your relationship with your deck is kind of a rushdown character's relationship with their deck. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're gonna run through your deck uncommonly fast, but you don't need to spend cards necessarily as efficiently as some characters do, just because of how much damage you can deal. Right. So okay. Let me talk about the last attacks, and then I'll go through the whole thing. This is a 7-power ultra. This is probably a 6-power special. This, as we've covered, is probably a 6-power special. This might be a 7-power special.
Yep.
These are extraordinarily high numbers for somebody who's not a grappler.
Yeah, that's actually consistently across the kit. You'd be very lucky to get, on some characters you'd be very lucky to get like 1/5, and here's a lot of high power cards.
Yep. Now you do still have a 3, and a 4. But as mentioned, mix is kind of your safety valve. It's just a card that works at ranges 1 to 4, and it gives you a bunch of positioning control. It's not something that is, it's a consistent tool. It's not your big payout.
Right.
And then Snip is actually maybe the scariest card in your kit. This is because it is a range 1 speed 6 ignore guard that has 3 power, which means that it stuns everything except for grasp.
Right.
The drawback, I guess, of Snip is that you don't get gauge. The commensurate upside is that if you hit with it, the opponent has -6 guard on their next attack.
And meaning that if you have anything even remotely fast in your hand, you're probably winning the next strike.
Exactly. If you can hit their slow button with snip, then they have to be fast during the next strike, or they're going to get stunned by your grasp, because now you have 3 power and they have -6 guard.
Right.
This is brutal. This is I won this strike, and also I'm probably winning the next strike. Good luck. Right. That's why it's worth losing the gauge on it, is because you're winning. I'd say you're winning 1.5 strikes. You're not guaranteed to win the second one, but you are saying that if the opponent dares not to play a fast button, then there's a very good chance that they can just get nothing. All right, so range 1 mix-up threat, incredibly important, incredibly threatening, very, very useful. Thrust, primarily a range 3 mix-up threat, where at range 3, this is the thing that beats everything except for dive, assuming that you got to initiate. In various board states, like this, this actually becomes incredibly reliable because it now doesn't lose to anything, again, except for dive. And the opponent can't do anything janky to prevent this payout.
They can't get over it or anything, yeah.
Yeah, so in this position, right, an assault is going to come in. Sorry, a slash. I did it this time. Anyway, a slash will come in and hit, and then you'll hit back for the same amount of damage.
Right. Because you won't have gotten your big awesome boosted payout from your range 1 effect, but you hit.
Exactly. And so that's okay. However, in situations where they can't prevent you from getting that payouts, then you have a 7 power attack.
Right.
Um, I like hitting for 7. It's fun. Um, sometimes I'll hit for more than that, but 7's a good number. All right, so payout. Scarecrow is a button that says range that isn't particularly real. It is also a payout card. It is something that says, oh, we got to a range where you have literally nothing that can hit me. Cool. I just need to put any continuous boost into play, and then I'll come in and hit you for at least 6. You will prefer to have a continuous boost that grants power so that they can't play a sweep.
Right.
Um, something like Mini Faust or something like Let's Rock, and you will hit for 7, which means they have to play a focus to deal with it. And even then, they're going to trade badly.
And if you initiated from here with a continuous boost on this, it's not really a mix-up unless you're playing block or something to try to bait the card. Like you're coming in and they can just mash the sweep if you don't have power on it.
Correct, and that's why I did not describe this as mix-up. It is a reward.
It's a payout,
it is something that
right?
Says, yeah, you got to do something awesome. Because and by the way, there is also niche usage for having 2 copies of this card in your hands. EX Scarecrow is a perfectly solid range 4 option.
Oh, sure.
Where it now pumps above curve, it comes in, it does decent damage, gets you in their face. It's nice.
Right.
And that is
worth mentioning now that it's come up, that before 8 is after before close 8 is after a full stop from the previous sentence. You don't need the boost in play to get the close effect. You just get the plus 2 power minus 2 speed from the boost.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. The other major use case of Scarecrow is against characters who are projectile zoners who are trying to keep you very, very far away, where they can have speed 4 or lower projectiles that you can just be faster than.
Right.
And so you have this thing that is speed 4 and says before close 8, and that can be useful. I find that it's often less significant than the other use case of this card, because against projectile zoners, you're probably hanging out in mid-range playing literally anything else because you have a bunch of other stuff.
Right.
Like,
and
you don't need Scarecrow.
If you find yourself at long range, you're probably not going to stay there for very long.
Indeed. Yeah, the typical answer to that is to put Faultless Defense into play, and then play Scarecrow and say, okay, you can hit me with your fast projectile, and then I'll come in and hit you for 6.
Right.
Like, that's fine. All right, we'll do Ultra's last. Love is interesting because of this before effects. This is a safety valve in a different sense. This is a thing that says, if it looked like my boost was going to shoot me in the foot, and I need to talk about boost at length. Anyway, go figure. This character with boost and his ability has a lot to do with boost. Anyway,
of course.
This before effect is you can lose one of your own boosts to get plus 2 power. This has some weird effects. So if you have, let's see. If you have Faultless Defense in play, well, by the time your before effect's going off, you don't need this guard anymore. So it's just kind of a free 2 power.
You either are going first, therefore you probably don't need the guard except in like the rare circumstance where reactive stun matters, or you're going second, and that means that your before effect hasn't happened yet, so you still get the guard, right?
Right. Like if they're faster than you and they hit you, then the guard is applying. You have it. It's still here.
Right.
And then when it's your turn, as it were, when you are activating your attack, you go, okay, well, I don't need this guard anymore. Discard it, get plus 2 power.
Right.
On the other hand, your attack is EX. Now it isn't. The speed change here, to be clear, does not matter in the least. But it does mean you're going down 1 power to go up 2. That's obvious. But you don't keep the armor. And the math here is occasionally unintuitive. Anyway, now the main uses of this are for your special boosts, which can be double-edged. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that way, way more. Anyway, the properties of this attack shape are that at range 3 and 4, it beats probably anything that's not a projectile, as long as you're faster. At range 3, it's under curve, but it beats everything except for slash. And then at range 4, it just kind of beats everything that isn't a fast projectile. It's not very reliable against people like Axel. It's pretty reliable against a lot of people.
How does this work with something like if you top decked slash for Dash's boost, that isn't happening at a before timing. That's happening, it's an instant boost, so it doesn't have the now effect on it. But you would advance 3, and then you
After an instant boost is resolved, that is to say that after you performed its effects, it goes to your discard pile.
okay, so you don't have
So there is nothing in play for
you don't
love.
have an instant boost to remove for love to get its bonus power.
Correct.
Got
Yeah,
it.
this before effect cannot discard an instant boost because there's no way to get an instant boost inserted into that timing step.
Got it. Okay, that makes
You will
sense.
only ever be able to discard continuous boosts.
Okay.
Note, by the way, when you have 2 effects of the same timing window, you can choose the order. So Mini Faust before +1 power, and then Love before discard it, get +2 power. There's a few of those interactions throughout the kit. This is just one of them, where this turns into a 7 power instead of just a 6, because you don't
Right.
actually lose the power.
Once you've gotten it from the boost, it doesn't go away again because it's specifically at the before timing.
Correct.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
once you've done this before effect, then you have the +1 power, even if the boost goes away. You will lose the range. Yeah.
Right.
Faust mechanics can be tricky, by the way.
Oh
Anyway.
yeah, no, I mean, appropriately, he's a weirdo. So that
Yeah.
tracks. It would honestly be unflavorful if he was a straightforward character.
Well, it's a little of column A and a little of column B, I think, because his playing him, at least in my opinion, is relatively fluid. His interactions, you just do them and you go, "Huh, yeah, that sure worked a way that okay, interesting." But your job as the Faust player is to create chaos and then respond to it effectively. And so you don't actually need to break your brain figuring out how stuff is going to work together. This is not somebody where you have to build up a complicated. Hold on, what's the word for that? It's a machine where a series of steps happen, and
Oh,
it tests the convoluted.
like a Rube Goldberg machine.
Rube Goldberg, thank you.
Here to
You are
help.
not creating Rube Goldberg machines.
Okay.
Because usually you only have one boost in play, maybe two. And so you kind of look at that and you go, okay, what's the thing in my hand that works best with that? Um, but yeah, so I find that his relative complexity is actually pretty fluid. He is not that hard to just kind of get rolling with. Um, anyway, that's my opinion.
Okay.
All right, we've talked a bit about specials. The of this time on boosts, but let's talk about ultras. These are actually kind of both utility buttons. This is a 4-gauge 7-power utility button. That's a heck of a utility button.
I was gonna
But
say.
the reason the reason I say utility is because of this effect: attacks with higher speed don't hit you. And then before advance 3, meaning that it has a pretty specific positioning requirement. It works only so it's like dive, right? It has before advance 3, so it works a lot like the normal called dive, meaning that it mostly hits at ranges 3 and 4. Because at 3 you'll jump over, or at 4 you'll just end up next to them. With only speed 3, this actually makes it susceptible to losing, or sort of losing, to a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Because they can play their on-curve slash and come in. They don't hit you, but you don't hit them. They can play their on-curve dive and come in, and the same thing happens. They can use a bunch of other options depending on the character, or depending on how much movement they have. It's not super reliable unless your opponent's in the corner. If they're cornered at 1 or 2, and note 2, because as I mentioned, that's actually not a range you generally like, then this becomes really, really strong. Where most people will not be able to do anything about it other than maybe play their own dive and jump over to you,
Right.
which is risky. But if you initiate with Bone Crushing at range 1 or 2 when the opponent is cornered, they probably just lose that strike. Maybe they can play a focus, but hey, they were going to play a focus against one of your attacks. Like this or Scarecrow or Mix, or Thrust. That's fine.
Trading well into focus maybe isn't worth 4-gauge, but is probably a net win for you, or at least it's pretty close.
Yeah, like it's something that was going to happen with one of your attacks. That's one fewer focus they have,
Right.
and that's fine. But yes, it's probably not worth 4-gauge, and that's a lot of why I say this is kind of utility. Like you need to be sure that you need this effect as well as this stat line for this to really be worthwhile.
Right.
Like this card shines if you are doing something like evading an opponent's ultra, and then they're extremely sad.
Right.
And it's awesome at that. It is also an attack which with its own boost or with certain other boosts, can become far, far more reliable in its effective range. Um, so it turns into a pretty stable payout if you have some extra movement or some extra range on top of it, and then you're initiating with it, and then, the opponent dies. But just kind of playing from raw, I usually play it for the utility, for the evasion property,
Okay.
where I need to not get hit.
And you're willing to trade 4 gauge to say, well, maybe I'll hit, but I will, for the things that I'm afraid of, I will be able to dodge them
Mm,
consistently. And that's worth 4 gauge
yeah.
to you if the thing that you're dodging is scary enough.
Right. It's like, okay, if I need to not die to this fast button, then I have a way to say I'm not going to die to this fast button.
Right.
Great.
And if the fast button is grasp and you have more than 3 life, maybe you don't, maybe that's not worth the 4
Then
gauge.
no.
But
No.
if you're literally going to die to it, then you would pay the 4 gauge every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I get
Like
you.
when I'm thinking my opponent's going to play a slash, like I'm cornered, they're going to play a slash, gain advantage, follow up with some other thing that I can't do anything about. Then I start to go, okay, let's say that slash can't do that, and now I'm out of the corner, and now things are okay. Um, like it's finding a way to scroll your way out of those situations. Is what I use this for. It is
Makes
expensive,
sense.
so I don't use it for that all that often. I will often just play this boost from hand because it's a really good boost. But that's at least my use case for this stack.
Okay.
And now for this nonsense. Well, what could this be? Which properly pronounced, I'm not going to try. I would have about 7 more W's on it, I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
uh, it is an ultra, which essentially uses your exceed ability, except that instead of choosing, you just get the top 2 cards, and that can be interesting. For all the reasons I described earlier about why your basic ability is not 100% reliable and why you need to be careful with it, this can actually, yeah, I should say this is basically your basic ability twice instead of your exceed ability once. Um,
Oh,
you don't
because
have a choice
yeah,
here.
you don't get the choice. You just get both, and that could be awesome, but that could be it's actually a slot machine now.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. This
Okay.
is not super reliable. This is a thing that when I play this card, I'm almost always playing it uh, at range. Well, at range 2 to 5, but very often at 2 or 5 because of how my movement works. Um, where at 2, then I know that if I top deck my slash, I will advance 3 and still hit. And same at 5, I advance 3 and I still hit.
Right.
Right? That's what I'm most worried about. And then I hope that I don't do something like, oh, actually, now I gain this, which means as I now have this before effect, and so now I go to range 1 and now I miss anyway.
Right.
Whoops. Um, like it can be awkward. What it is though is a speed 6 attack that has a pretty high chance of hitting even at ranges 3 to 5, where a lot of people don't have speed 6 attacks. In that sense, I would actually describe this as a reversal. It's a defensive option that I use when my opponent is playing something that I need to outspeed, and I'm willing to take a pretty big risk in trying to make sure I outspeed them. Like the potential reward here is fairly high. The potential risk is comparably high. But there's often if movement makes me miss, it will also make them miss.
Oh, sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
if I'm over here at 5 and I get this boost, which says push 1, retreat 1, well, that's a little unfortunate. Ain't nobody hitting.
Right. But as you mentioned earlier, you have, especially if it's a reversal, it was on your opponent's turn. You probably have more ability to make up that distance or make use of that distance on your turn than the average character would. So you're not super sad about getting into as you
Mm,
said, you're not really sad about getting into a weird
right.
position and causing a whiff.
I can, yeah, I can recover from this position. Range 7, yeah, I can deal with that. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Maybe not my favorite thing, but it's fine. Also, I'll note that it does sustain them, which means that I still have this little hit effect, which could be nice. If I got this in play, for example, then I'm going to have this for the next strike, and that could be extremely useful.
Right.
If you sustain something like Badass, where you just have an EX attack now, then your next attack is also going to be EX, and that's awesome. If you happen to sustain Faultless Defense, well, at the start of your next turn, it's going to go to your gauge, which at least refunds some of the costs that you spent.
So
Did that interaction make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you would get it, sustain it, but then your next turn would come around anyway, and it would go to gauge
It
like
goes to
normal.
gauge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, okay, free gauge.
Right.
Like, we'll take it.
And maybe you could have used it during that strike, and it helped somehow. Probably not on what could this be, but strangers. No, I mean no. At the before timing, you sort of yeah.
The guard definitely doesn't matter in that strike.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It can
So
matter for reactive stun, but again, that's an edge case.
yeah, that's very niche. So this one is more for me than probably for people watching this who are specifically interested in learning about Faust. But this will help me sort of make sense of this. The comparison point that I would make uh, to Faust in general, but also to this card is Platinum's Ultra is Miracle Gene, which also involves you sustaining boosts from your ability.
That one's from your discard.
That's from your discard, and that is very different because you're choosing them, and also the shape of her boosts are dramatically different than Faust's.
Mm-hmm.
So I shouldn't be treating the get two boosts and sustain it. That's nice, but I'm not getting light and fierce on a strike and then on another strike the way that I would with Platinum.
Right. Yeah. If you're coming at Faust from having played other boost oriented characters, and you're seeing sustain as being the keyword, which means that you win, because in a lot of cases it's like, oh, I can sustain my strongest boost. I get it from multiple strikes. That's amazing. Don't view this card that way. It is not that reliable.
Okay.
The only case where that's going to be true is where you have 2 to 4 cards left in your deck, and you know exactly what they are, and you go, oh, I know there's no way I will have a bad pull. I know that I'll get 2 cards that are each useful.
Right.
That's not very likely.
Right.
Okay. Like, most of the time, this is risky. Its value is it's very, very fast, and it has a pretty good chance of hitting because at range 2 to 5, it hits at all those ranges, and a lot of movement will still let it hit at all those ranges, and that is itself useful.
Right. So as you said, it's a reversal with some weirdness on top of it that might make it miss, but you're probably happy with that.
Yeah. And it's 2 gauge, which is relatively cheap. You have a 2 gauge Exceed, and you have a 2 gauge Ultra, and you definitely want to Exceed, but you can probably still afford to play this once, maybe even twice, because you will build some gauge. Like any Stripe character, you have access to some gauge generation among the normal boosts. There you go.
Yep.
These two. You might well get them in play, especially Let's Rock. You might well get in play with your ability, and therefore just kind of get it kind of for free, where you just goes to your gauge immediately. You also have this other gauge boost over here. So it's like a little bit more than the baseline. But mostly the reason you build so much gauge is because your attacks are good at hitting. Like you have mix, it will hit. You have thrust, it will hit.
Right.
You have Scarecrow, it will hit. Like you're probably going to build gauge reliably when you need it.
Right. The only reason that you wouldn't build an immense overage of gauge is because you're hitting them for 7 over and over again, and the opponent is dead first, and you're
Yes.
that's not a downside.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay.
Like if you have enough gauge to play Bone Crushing Excitement, that it's probably lethal, because if you've built 4 gauge, and I'm going to assume that you exceeded first, so you built 6 gauge, then yeah, they probably don't have 7 life left.
Yeah, unless you've been really crutching on
unless it's
follow
only been
defense
these yes.
and block and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's the attack kit. I assume we're done then. I assume there's really nothing else to talk about for Faust.
There's really nothing of note. There's
note.
Nothing unusual about his boosts.
No.
They're all perfectly ordinary.
Yeah. So before
get out of here. No.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Before we get into the boosts themselves, I had a couple of things that I wanted to ask about, just like the general play patterns of his boosts, because there was something that you mentioned about Mini Faust that was interesting to me. And if it makes more sense to cover this as we go into it more granularly, please feel free to delay. But you said that you sometimes boost this from hand, and having read his character ability, assumed that like my monocle popped out when I heard you say that. The idea that, all right, so this is a character who's boosting for free all the time at random. Do I have permission to boost from hand? I can do that.
Yes, you are allowed to play neutral.
Okay.
If you were never allowed to play boost from hands, we wouldn't have printed the cancelable icon in any
cancelable boost, and that was actually my follow-up question is, Faust is using his gauge for these ultras, as you've mentioned, but he also does have the ability to play Guilty Gear neutral and cancel some boosts.
Yeah, he can Yeah.
as we're talking about all this stuff, that's another consideration that like many of these boosts are able to be played from hand, and also that's another gauge outlet. You have a lot of ability
Yes.
to control your positioning to go into a strike. I'm assuming as your deck composition narrows down and thins out and you have fewer options, you can say, I really want to be in a specific spot. Well, good
Mhm.
thing you have lots of cancelable movement boosts that would get you there. And sort of
Yes.
considerations like that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, that's accurate. Um, but yeah, your wealth of boosts, as for mini boost well, I'm gonna move on to talking about the boost now, if
Yes.
that did you have another question?
No. That was just wanted
Okay.
to make sure that we covered both of those things that the boosts are
Yep.
relevant for that as well.
Absolutely, yes. Okay. So like mini boost oriented characters where you have distinctive and powerful boosts, they will shape your neutral. So neutral is the part of the game where both players are jockeying to attain an advantage over the other, right? You're like, I'm ahead because I'm at my favorite range. Now my opponent goes to a range that I don't like. Now they're ahead. Now I have to do something about that, right? This exchange of turn by turn is neutral.
Right.
If you're striking every turn, you're not playing neutral. You're, probably playing a rushdown character. So you shouldn't expect to be using your ability every single turn because then that means you're striking literally every turn. And although you can theoretically draw enough cards with just effects to maintain that, it's going to be hard because at some point you're going to be in a position where you have to play your safety valve. And then that's not in your hands anymore. And so the next time that happens, you don't have that.
Right.
You don't want to be in that position.
And if
That's not good.
and if all you're doing is striking, you really are just at the mercy of what's on top of your deck every single turn. You're not doing anything to control.
Mhm.
I know that you can't like put things on top of your deck, but you can get things into your hand, and that lets you
Right.
have information control at least.
Right. Like you can use things like the change cards action to go through your deck and pick up a bunch of cards and go, okay, this is a hand that I know that I can work with regardless of what comes off the top because like I picked up both copies of Dive. I don't have to route Ukemi. Now I can do badass cancel because I'm not going to Ukemi myself.
Right.
Um, things like that. So paying attention to your movement boosts is your movement boost especially is a big deal, and then Ukemi as a side thing just because I've had that happen to me.
Yeah, and
Um,
you now you're doing your civic duty to prevent it from happening to anyone
yes.
else. Yeah.
Yes, like, it's fine if you're prepared for it, but don't assume it can't happen.
Right. Sure.
Um, like, there's a lot of things where I'll take a risk and I just go, "Okay, yeah, I knew the risks, I knew the costs, it's fine," but don't bank on it if you are just banking on the odds being in your favor. They won't
Right.
always.
Right. Of
Uh,
course.
like, you want to roll with high odds as Faust a lot, and it will be deceptively non-random because you are maintaining a hand that will control it. If you roll with low odds and go heavy on the randomness, just smash that front ability all the time, you might win the occasional game, but not very often, not against opponents that are paying a lot of attention.
Right.
Uh, all right, so let's talk neutral. Uh, I love neutral. It's interesting. You have some movement tools. This can move in if you're too far away or move away. This one is especially built for taking you from range 1 to range 3. It's also pretty good at going from range 2 to range 4, depending on where you are. And it builds a little extra gauge most of the time, but also, very importantly, it draws a card. Um, these are not cancelable. So you can just do these. You can just play them, and that's fine. You're allowed. You can say, actually, I want to just play this boost. Sorry, giving myself some face here. There. Push one, retreat one, draw one,
Right.
draw for end of turn. Cool.
Yeah.
That's a
I
pretty good action.
I would love to prepare and also move my opponent.
Yeah, like that it tends to be good. And now I have this little key charge in play. Sorry, that's jargon. Latent jargon. All right. I now have this gauge boost in play.
Right.
That's going to build gauge if I hit. Maybe I don't hit, but it didn't cost me anything to do that, really, because I drew an extra card off of it. So yeah. Um, this is perfectly allowed. You can do this. Likewise with this one. You can do this. The thing that you want to consider, this is one of the weirdest anti-pressure tools that you have. It's a pressure and anti-pressure tool. This is a non-cancelable boost that is one of your double-edged boosts. And I'll talk about each of them, but this one is really, really obviously double-edged. Both players have, after take 3 non-lethal damage, then discard this, meaning the faster player has after take 3 non-lethal damage.
Right.
The slower player doesn't,
Right.
because it's going to be discarded when the faster player discards it.
Right.
So if you have this in play, the opponent's going to look at that and go like, huh, I guess I wait for you to strike and then I play block. Like,
I play slow, right? And then
yeah, like I
you
want to
spike them, you dust them.
exactly.
Okay,
Like the trick to using this boost effectively, like this is in fact putting a bomb in play.
right,
It's there's a ticking bomb, and both players don't want to be the one that's holding it when it goes off. Where they go, okay, well, you often want to play things like spike if you're in range for them to matter. Where you go, well, if you outsped me, you took 3 damage,
right,
and if you didn't, you took 5.
right.
Um, so you're getting some kind of edge on that. But
This
usually the Mhm.
Oh, I was gonna ask just really briefly. This rarely comes up because non-lethal damage in the middle of a strike doesn't happen super often. But non-lethal does not mean it doesn't stun, correct? Or that it doesn't contribute to a stun.
That is true. You can in fact be technically this can stun you. It doesn't usually matter because you did it during the after timing.
Okay,
Uh, there are a few there are rules edge cases where somebody cares that their opponent was stuns
right,
even if they are not the one who did the stunning.
right.
Um, and those effects exist. But yes, if you play cross and you outspeed and you hit, you go, okay, cool. I hit you for 3. I retreat. I take 3. Yeah, you're stunned.
Right, okay.
Um,
And
it mostly didn't matter, but you are.
and similarly, and again, this still won't matter outside of those edge cases. But if you played Spike and took 3 and whiffed somehow, and then I hit you for another couple of damage with my attack, those two things would compound, and you would still be stunned.
Correct.
Correct? Okay, got it. All right.
Correct. Yes. If you play the range 1 spike and they play I can't think of an example among the normals. Well, they play mix then, which is the speed 2. Where did I put it? Oh, that's not it.
It's bomb. It's the
We're
one.
looking at it.
It's yeah, we're looking directly
Thank
at it.
you.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, you play dust at range 1 and you outspeed and you take 3 damage from this after effect. And they played mix, so now they advance 2 and hit you for 4. Well, since you have taken a total of 7 damage, you're stunned.
You're stunned. Okay. Yep.
Um, but we probably don't care.
Very rarely matter in the circumstances it does matter. That was mostly just for my rules brain to make sense of the interaction.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are effects in Guilty Gear Strive, the board game, that care about the opponent being stuns. Faust does not so much have them. Milia notably does. So that is a thing that can actually come up and matter. But yeah, so Bomb mostly says both players are trying to play slow or they're trying to play a mid speed that is going to win the strike if it goes first, which means they're okay going second because if they go second, the opponent takes 3, and if they go first, they win the strike.
Right.
Um, Bomb is usually Bomb is an anti-pressure tool. I described it that way because if the opponent has any kind of speed boost in play, then you put this out, and then you try to not play a thing that will lose so badly to a mid speed that you didn't feel like it was worth them taking 3 damage.
Right.
So at ranges 1 or at 4 or greater, where dust is not a threat, this is a thing that says, okay, you don't want to strike me because if you strike me, I play block, you take damage, I get gauge, and not much else happens, and that's good for me. It
So
can be
in those situations, it's a diffusal option the way that like tech or scramble is a diffusal option. It's not necessarily like you're using it to get out of a tricky setup, not necessarily like you, the 3 damage would not be the payout in that case. The
Mhm.
making the opponent not do the thing that they were going to do with that scary speed boost is payout
Right.
enough.
Right. Like it is a way to it is a psychological tool. It is a way to dissuade your opponent from doing something because the value proposition is now different for them, and they're looking at this going, "Oh, I don't want to deal with that." Um, and importantly, if they think, "Okay, well then I'll play block. I'll just play the slowest thing." You can play love and throw away the bomb.
Throw away the bomb. I see.
Like this twists that little fast or slow mix up with bomb into your favor because you have a card that says I can be faster than you and also not take damage. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a so an anti-pressure tool. This actually tracks with everything you're saying about Faust. So like you have something that is if not random is at least not wholly in your control,
Mm,
like your ability, and you have something that gives you more control over it than your opponent.
mhm.
This is Faust in microcosm, right? This is the interaction of his
Yeah,
character ability in very small writing. I gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is one of them.
Yeah.
And there are others. I mean, another prominent one. Uh, okay, so this is one of the double edge boosts. Like probably the most obvious double edge boost. You play it to say, I need to draw cards, and I'm going to try to keep my opponent off me for a little bit. And then if they think that, if they make assumptions about how I'm going to handle the situation, I can overturn those assumptions.
Right.
Um, let's go on to the next double edge boost. Banana peel. By the way, we are not actually telling you the names of all of Faust boosts.
That's
This is
right.
because Faust has almost twice as many boost names as most characters. Well, special and ultra boost names.
Right.
Banana peel is also known as donut. Bomb is also known as meteors. In fact, all but 2 of his boosts have a different name printed on each. We're just going to tell you the one that is on the card in front of us for the sake of convenience, because
Right.
that's the one you're going to see when you're looking at the screen.
And all of them are cosmetic, only different cosmetically, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
purely cosmetic difference.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yeah, the other copy of Thrust has donut, but it is exactly the same as banana peel.
that said, though, be careful when somebody parries you and they see your hand, because if you played one with a different boost name and they're paying attention, they might know that you have the other card as well.
Yes, you do actually want to remember what your opponent knows about your hands
Right.
when that comes up. All right, so banana peel. Both players, and again, it's going to look familiar, right? Both players have before advance 1 and after discard this, which means only the faster player has before advance 1.
Right. So this is
Um,
something that can screw up the faster player, but not the slower player.
Yep, screw up or benefit the faster player.
Right.
Where you go, well, my range 2 dust doesn't work, but my range 2 grasp sure does. Like, that's effective range right there. That's pretty useful.
Right.
Uh, uh, this does mean that range 2 love still works, by the way, because you can use this before effect to discard this before it ever activates.
Yep. So and
So
you
another,
don't have to worry about
yeah,
walking into Love's own range shadow. You just get rid of it beforehand.
yep, exactly.
Okay.
Um,
So
yeah,
this makes you race. That you and your opponent race to go fast. This makes you race to go slow.
exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Um, and what banana peel will often be used for is, how to put this? Generally, a faster player is going to try to play something where they can be evasive. They're going to either jump in with cross from range 3. They're going to play a dive, hoping that they're faster. They're going to play a range 2 grasp because, hey, it's now very likely to hit. Um, this is why you will most commonly not see this just played on your turn without canceling. But if you cancel it, you get to play one of the silliest attacks in the. Well, maybe that's not quite true. You get to play a very silly attack, which is an on curve 3 power ignore guard.
Right.
Now, on curve is kind of a lie here. So on curve means it conforms to the speed curve. I'm not going to go into that here because that's a whole nother subject. But basically, what that should mean is that it outspeeds the fastest normal that hits at its range. Because at range 2, the fastest normal that hits is cross.
Right.
As soon as you put this into play, that's not true anymore. The fastest normal that hits is grasp now.
Right. Okay. So if your opponent actually can just reverse
They can just play grasp,
reverse the
and
advantage,
now they're
walk
faster.
in. Right. Okay.
Yeah, because whoever the faster player is, the curve has now changed by 1.
Gets the
Um,
advantage. Okay.
yes, but and since it could be either player, it's a bizarre kind of symmetry where it's not really just in your favor.
Right.
Um, yeah, so only do this if the opponent is out of grasps, or if you are pretty confident they're not going to try it.
Right.
Like if you are threatening both of your grasps, and you're like, well, I'm going to play grasp, so they'll play focus, and therefore I'll play snips and a sip, and therefore they lose. That's what we call a mix-up.
Right. Sure.
Yes, but especially as you get later in the game, the opponent might actually be out of both copies of grasp. This is real dumb.
Right.
Because this just tends to be unbeatable.
I also can't help but notice that the two of the double-edged boosts are also on your most consistent, as you said, your safety valves.
What
So
a remarkable coincidence. Sorry, go on.
isn't it's almost like Exceed is like a designed game. That's crazy. But so when you top deck something with your
Mhm.
character ability and you get this, you might not have the hand composition to deal with it because it's something that your opponent could benefit from more than you can. And one of the things that you have to deal with that situation is the boost that you just top decked, and you don't have that card anymore unless you have the other copy.
Mhm.
How worried should I be about pulling banana peel or bomb with my ability, or do most hand compositions have something that
So
they can do with that?
Yeah, so not especially because these two are not boosts that will warp the current board state so dramatically that you can't find something else to do about them, right? Like bomb is fundamentally the like block, dust, maybe cross mix up level. You can play something with normals, uh, and anything else that you're doing is probably going to be reasonable. Like this is making a speed based mix up. It's not a movement based thing.
Right.
This does change the current range. It does change the current shape of the board in terms of what's available movement wise. But most of the stuff that it does that matters is going to be normals.
Right.
Like
And
these, this
you
has the
have
most dramatic impact of normals.
and you have a pretty wide range bands among your specials, and honestly, some of your normals too. So you should be okay.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
these are not boosts that typically require these attacks to act as safety valves because these boosts will they might be a little bit risky, but you can probably play anything else and make it
oh,
work with them.
I see. These could come back to bite you, but it would require your opponent to make a play that involves this boost. It's not pulling the boost itself. Isn't It's not like the Ukemi example or the dash example where just the fundamental act of playing it messed you up. They have to.
Right.
It's interactive, and you could lose that interaction. But
Right. Like
that's the risk.
the only case where it's a problem is if you pull banana peel and you go, well, I definitely wanted to play dust at range 2.
Right.
Or I guess what could this be at range 2, but then you were crazy, so it's fine. But it's like that's one of the only plays that you could have been planning that's gonna because if you were planning to play a range 3 or 4 dive, hey, that still works. Planning to play anything on curve, it still works. Um, planning to play something slow, well, that probably still works too. Like the opponent's going to be going to do something. They might not be faster than you, but if they do something that is faster than you, all they gained is advance 1, and depending on what range you're playing at, that might not affect you much at all.
I get you. Okay, so just pulling these from the top of the deck doesn't screw you up necessarily, but it does forcibly involve you into a mix-up situation that you could win or you could lose.
Yes,
Okay.
you need to be ready with it. You need to be ready for it with the rest of your hands, just like is always true of Faust. You need to have a hand that is generally flexible, has at least each side of a thing, so you can make the choice. But you don't need these specific cards for it.
Got
Like
it.
these specific cards are the most valuable as safety valves against your movement stuff that can trip you up. Where if you throw dash or hundreds and weight, I think I'm about to say hammer, so I'm assuming the other one's hammer. Anyway, uh, you go, oh, now I'm in a significantly different position than I was a second ago.
Better use my
Ooh,
safety
yeah.
valves. Got it.
Now I need something that's gonna that's what those are mostly for.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. All right. Oh well, yeah, might as well actually. This is technically a double edge boost. Is almost always good for you. The way it is double edged is if you did not that was going to work at range current range +2.
Right.
Right. If you're at range 1 and your hand is only comprised of grasp and snip and focus, then you don't want to go to range 3 and strike. That's going to be an issue. Uh, so if you are in this situation, you should probably just wild swing. Anyway,
Right. Because you have
I'll do
plenty
what
of
else.
things in your kit, and if they're not in your hand, they're probably in your deck.
Yeah, like you're pretty solid at range 3. If snip and grasp are in your hands, I'm pretty comfortable wild swinging at range 3 as Faust.
Right.
Um, I don't want to wild swing snip 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 at any range other than 1. I'm extremely sad if this card goes down and I didn't decide to play it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so generally speaking, this can mess up your range, but it very often won't because you're comfortable at a significant variety of ranges. The one drawback though is it's on Scarecrow. So if this puts you from range like 4 to 5 outs, you might not have the other Scarecrow to follow up with.
Right. And
Um,
which is why you mentioned when you're playing this from hand, the best places for it tend to be 1 or 2 to make a little bit of space, not to make all of the space.
exactly. Like
Right.
this boost hitting the board, especially from hand, is most useful when you're going from close range to mid range. And out to about range 5 is acceptable, where at 5 you still have thrust. You have okay thrust, and you have uh, where is it? Arguably, what could this be? But like you don't want to rely on Scarecrow to follow up 100 weight.
Right.
So you're probably not jumping out from 3 to 5 or 4 to more than
4 to
that.
6. Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
yeah, like that. Like past that point, it starts to get silly. We're like, why did I go to range 6 when I don't have Scarecrow?
Right. And
Um,
you also can't you can't deal with this movement, this now effect by playing love either, because that would
Right.
happen before the before effect. All you would
Yep.
do is deprive yourself of gauge.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like, it doesn't change the movement interactions to play love. It just means that if you are still in range of love hitting, then you have a choice between power and gauge.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, so often useful, especially useful as a neutral tool where you're just changing the position a little bit. It's mostly used when you're already at close range and want to be a little bit farther away from somebody. Um, but yeah, not cancelable notably.
Okay.
All right. Next double edge boost. The Afro. This does not have a different name. It's always an Afro.
It's always an afro. It's too iconic to not be the afro.
That is in fact true, yes. It gives the person in whose boost area it is, which for every other boost I don't have to specify, -6 guard. And a now effect, although that now effect is actually ignored if you use the after effect because it says ignoring now effects
Ignore.
when
Yep.
in the after
Yep.
effect. Yeah.
Right.
So explicitly, if you give the opponent the afro, they don't draw 2. If you give yourself an afro, you draw 2. Um, that's why this is cancelable, by the way, is if this was just draw 2, -6 guard on yourself, that's aggressively mediocre. That's not a
Yeah.
thing that you would probably play from hands.
Right.
Like, so it's marginally better than preparing, and I gave myself -6 guard. Why did I do this? But cancelable draw 2 is substantially better. Um, it is still relatively niche. It is still something that you're probably not going to do a ton, but it is a thing that you might need to do occasionally, where you go, well, I desperately need to see new cards and then do something else. So
Right.
let's
And,
go.
and sometimes you might not have a choice because it's coming from here.
Mhm. Yeah, and in that case, I'm talking about playing it from hand and canceling it, but in that case,
Right.
you are at least going, "Well, I drew 2 cards and I'm striking." Like, that's not so bad. I'm just committing to one side of this mix-up pretty hard because I can't really play a counterattack.
Right. Sure.
Um, but playing it from hand on your turn is mostly exclusively, I'm going to cancel it. You're probably not going to play it and not cancel it.
Right.
But yeah, that's Afro. Uh, quick aside, when you play this card, make sure it goes into the correct player's discard pile at the end of the next strike. Just saying. Um, I very often have my Afro put in my opponent's discard pile because we weren't paying attention.
Right.
Uh,
Sure.
anyway,
And
uh, mhm.
cards can cards can't go in your. I guess this is probably old Exceed rules where this would mostly matter. Cards can go into your opponent's like sealed areas, but not their discard pile, something like that.
Oh yeah, there's a list of areas that your opponent's card can go into.
Okay.
Suffice to say that opponent cards can't be in your discard pile.
Gotcha.
Um, so yeah, when your opponent discards this boost from their boost area at the end of the strike, it goes to the owner's discard pile.
Yes. The
Um,
Faust's discard pile. The
yes,
Faust
your
who
opponent does not steal snip snip snip.
right. And then they reshuffle and get it back and you're incredibly sad.
That would be the worst. No,
Yeah.
yeah, let's not. Oof. Oh man. Okay. Um, now these boosts have some interesting properties. They're not what I would consider the double edge boosts, though. I think all of these are good.
Okay.
Um, Mini Faust does give your opponents a 4 effect that is +1 power. Um, but it gives you +1 maximum range, and it does not give them +1 maximum range. That's pretty notable. That turns on a whole bunch of threats that then they don't have the corresponding range bonus. Whereas, like, Banana Peel slash Donut gives the faster player extra range, extra effective range, excuse me. Where now your opponent can play a grasp and they might just come in and hit you. This one doesn't. So now your range 2 grasp hits with Mini Faust, and their range 2 grasp does nothing.
And odds
So,
are that that bonus range means that you can effectively turn off that bonus power
right.
at least a lot of the time. They play
Yeah,
a
it makes it much likelier for you
focus,
to
you're
just be
sad.
able to include them. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they play a focus, and then maybe they're sad because now we have the actually on curve snip snip
Ah.
snip.
Okay.
Uh, like if Mini Faust comes out from hands and you're at range 2, then that's one of those times that you're actually happy you're at range 2, where now you have the range 2 snip 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 that stuns everything and outspeeds everything, and it just wins.
Right.
Um, but yeah. Sorry, did I say from hand? I meant from deck. If Mini Faust comes out from deck. If it comes out from hand, hopefully you knew you had Snip 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 in your hands and you knew you were at range 2 and you decided to do it so that you were threatening it. Uh, but yes, this is good to play from hands at any range that isn't 1. Should be fairly obvious why it's not great to play at 1. If you play it from hand at range 1, then your opponent can strike with +1 power, and you're probably not getting mileage out of that range, and now they might play like a 7 power sweep, and that would be a problem.
Right. You
Uh,
get stunned out. You can't counter sweep. It's a big deal to lose the sweep.
it's a big deal.
Clean.
Yes. Yeah. But if you get to initiate with this, it looks considerably better because now you can be initiating with a range 1 to 4 sweep, which has 7 power, which stuns your opponent's sweep and catches your opponent's cross, assuming you're
Right.
at range 1.
Right.
So, like, that's okay. So, like, at range 1, flipping this durability, not that bad. At range 1, playing it from hand, questionable at best. At any range that isn't 1, well, okay, at any range up to 5 that isn't 1, playing this from hand is totally defensible. At range 6, I would question that, because I would rather save your range boost for when the range actually matters. Because if you're at range 6 and you're playing this, you're just playing Scarecrow. Like, you don't need the range.
Right. And at any other range lower than that, you might not be able to be totally prescriptive with what you're playing, but you have something.
Yeah, like, you
Ra-
put this into play at range 2, and you go, "Well, I have Grasp, just makes a mix-up, I have Snip, 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 I have Dive, I have" well, actually, I think everything in this kit hits if you put it into play at range 2. Yeah, literally everything except block hits. Um,
so don't play block.
cool. Yeah, don't play block.
Right.
At least not after this comes up. But yeah, at range 3, Grasp and Snip, Snip, Snip are the only cards that don't hit. At range 4, is that still true? I think that no, we had Cross to that list. But yeah, you get the idea. Like, most of your deck is going to hit once this is in play at ranges 2 to 4. Um, and then because you're Faust, you still have stuff at 5 where you actually can play mix, mix, mix. There we go. And have a pretty solid range 5 that hits and is still safe because you can retreat afterwards.
Right.
But yeah, good boost. Usually does not backfire. Generally, the way it backfires is your opponent was holding an EX and we were waiting for you to do something like this.
Right.
And now they have played an EX and outsped you and had an extra +1 power, and that can be a lot. But yeah, it's a reliable neutral tool. It's also like very, very good one for your ability most of your time. All right, Fanfare. This reads, usually what this reads is the opponent spends 2 force.
Yeah. Pretty much.
It's a minor resource drain. It is a minor, but not necessarily insignificant resource drain if you use it with your ability. So because of how aggressively you draw cards, because of how quickly you go through your deck and just how much draw there is as you go through your deck, it's fairly common in my experience for your opponents to kind of have their hand whittled down by your offense as you are coming at them with all this stuff. And so you will end up with a slightly comparatively larger hand. This depends a lot on player and on character. But now the opponent spends 2 force is not necessarily the worst thing because of your grappler instincts, which say the opponent losing cards means I know what's left in their deck and possibly their hand, means I can play stronger mix-ups.
Right.
Like, the value of this is the opponent ditched something. I look and I see what they ditched, and I say that's the thing they decided was the least valuable thing in their hands. Great, that gives me information.
Right. And that
Mhm.
advantage is compounded the lower their hand size is because you've been aggressing into them consistently, because now they are the difference between spending 2 force when you have 7 cards in hand and the difference between to when you are spending 2 force when you have 1 card or 2 cards in hand is pretty substantial in terms of your ability to like represent a threat on your
Mhm.
opponent's turn.
Yes. Yeah, if they're down to 3 or fewer cards in hand and you say, "All right, do I have any X or am I paying 2 force?" They will probably sweat over which 2 force they're spending. They will
Right.
probably still spend 2 force,
Right.
but it'll hurt them, right? If they have 7 cards in hand because you've been relatively laid back, which again, you can play neutral, it's allowed, and your neutral's pretty good. Don't be shy about that. But that's not the time when this boost shines.
Right.
That is just okay, they pay a force tax and we move on with our lives. But when they have a low hand, that's when you can actually consider playing this from your hands and go, all right, are you giving me the EX or are you throwing away cards that actually matter to you? And after they decide, then you decide if you're canceling. Typically, you will cancel. One of the things I like to do with this is they pay 2 force, cool, cancel, badass,
Badass.
cancel, strike. Yeah. Actually, my attack is EX. Sorry. I lied.
And you have 2 force less, or your opponent has 2 force less to deal with it now.
Yes. Now it is costly to do that, right? I paid essentially this and a gauge to make them pay 2 force as I strike with badass. Like
Right.
I did something that wasn't all that different resource wise, but I spent a gauge. They spent hopefully cards from hand that are going to weaken their ability to defend against whatever I'm throwing at them.
Right. And also the psychological damage of
Oh,
having an
I
EX
did that
attack
wrong.
anyway.
That's just fun. Yeah,
Of course.
yes. But yeah, so fanfare and same boost is usually a boost your opponent will not let you have, and if they do, that's almost certainly a like hefty win for you because getting an extra copy of your attack as EX out ever makes all those good numbers I was talking about before really stupid. Where this doesn't lose to dive, and now it does 8 damage.
Yep.
Um,
This
this
is
now has 7 power.
where's
Like
Snip? This is on
snippet, yeah,
curve at
this is
1
on
now.
curve.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, making more EX attacks is very, very strong.
Right.
So expect your opponent to negate it by paying force and be okay with that. Um, but usually don't play it from hand for that purpose, and certainly don't play it from hand expecting them not to negate it. The only reason they would not do that is because they literally can't afford it.
Right.
Um, like they will almost certainly do that. But yes, so it's not double edged. It's just they are going to stop it. They are going to do something about it. So they can interact with it. It's not something that you just do.
Right. That makes sense.
Yep. And then this is one where I harped on it length earlier. Like it's double edged in that if the movement can screw you up, then the movement can screw you up. If you are ready for the movements, then it's not. It's also just fantastic to play from hand. Like I think I made a point of that earlier, despite trying to hold myself back from talking about the boost earlier. I couldn't. This is a very solid neutral boost. This is a thing that says if I'm not in the right position, then now I probably am because any change of 2 spaces from ranges 1 to 5 will probably put me in range of the rest of my hands. Because I'm Faust. Like I've got reach. I'm going to hit you. I don't have the boost names reach. That's a different thing. But anyway, I'm going to hit you from various places. And that's alone infection / destructive goodwill. All right. Whew, okay.
So,
Boosts.
so
They're
that
good.
that so that's the kit. That's strikes and boosts.
All right. Now strategy, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I was about to ask, like, we have the tools now, and we have like the 1,000-foot view of what the game plan is. Maybe we can get like the middle magnification. Like, what does this look like actually in
Mhm.
practice?
Yeah, and this is also where it will probably become a little clearer. My own specific twist on this, where I'm not just talking about cards and how they're used, but because my priority is generally make this hurt.
Sure.
Um, I have this card that says 7 power, and I really like that, and I'm going to use it. This is why I say I play Grappler Faust, who it definitely is not a grappler. By the way, when I say grappler, I mean a character who needs a specific position to be to be at an advantage, and then they work really hard to get there, and then they win when they're there.
Right.
Your advantage position is like ranges 1, 3, 5, and the rest of the board. Like you're fine.
Right. Yeah.
You don't need to work to get to a good position.
Yeah. It's like at the very least, like maybe you have a best position and then a pretty good position and then a pretty good position and then all of the other spaces on the board are pretty good positions.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have slightly better, slightly worse, but you're pretty much fine. And if you're ever in a bad position, you can probably fix it. You've got a ton of movement. You're
Right.
fine. You are not a grappler. Um, but you sure do have some grappler level mix-ups. You sure do have this thing that hits for 7 and this thing that beats focus, and I love those things.
Right.
So on that note, don't let these drop frivolously. If both copies of Snip are in your discard pile at any time, the opponents will start to like breathe at a normal rate, and you don't want that. Um, that is not your goal. You want them to always have this taking up space in their minds. You want them to always be worried about this. Um, the harder they try to play against this, the more tools they'll use that are good against it that they'll exhaust. So you watch and you go, now they're out of grasps. Now they're out of whatever character specific reversal they happen to have. Cool. Eventually this is going to be free. And if they ever seem like they're disrespecting it too regularly, you can just play it anyway.
Right.
You can also, if you happen to like top deck scramble, just play a statistically very good attack by playing this at range 1, because if they don't happen to wild swing their grasp, by the way, most people are going to hold their grasp because they know they need to play against Ipsis at some point.
Right.
So at that point, they have to wild swing. Okay, this probably just wins.
Right, right.
Um, and that's very annoying for them. Now, I will say that you will usually initiate with it, in my experience. You're not as likely to use it as a defensive tool. But if your opponent is somebody that is in your face at range 1, playing the full range of mix-up, fast, mid, and slow, or poke, mid, and counterattack, whatever, same thing, then yeah, sometimes you'll need to defend with snip so that you can say, actually, please don't sweep me. I'm not going to lose the sweep at range 1. No, thank you. Um, but most of the time, I like to use this offensively because I want my opponent to be afraid of me initiating, and them knowing that this is an option is a good way to do that.
Right.
But yeah, so core, in my opinion, to your game plan is don't let your mix-up threat die, which that is very much a grappler thing, even though you are not a grappler. Um, Next up, in theory, I would love to talk about positioning. I am an awful person to talk about positioning. I'm really bad at it. It's actually the part of the game that I'm probably the worst at. Um, yeah, I'm bad at positioning, and I'm not the best at boosting. So it's great that I'm talking about Faust. But anyway,
Perfect.
yes, I will say that in general, your advantage and disadvantage positions are wonky. You're pretty happy at 4 because you've got this safe button and you've got this reasonably safe button, but they're not exceptional. And if your opponent is somebody who actually has like the full suite of projectiles, like Axel, then 4 gets a lot less comfortable for you. Um, at 3, now you've turned on the really awesome thrust. You're still threatening a mix-up with love, and you're threatening the whole normal mix-up where you've got dust slash sweep, and that's very good. But if your opponent's favorite range is 3, they might have more impressive stuff.
Right. Especially on
Well,
their turn when you're not leveraging your ability.
exactly. So I find that often what makes or breaks a favorite range for you is where the walls are. And again, I'm going to be kind of bad at explaining this. This is not one of my strengths, but everybody hates to be cornered
Right.
unless they have thrust. Then they don't.
Right.
Um, when you are cornered, thrust is pretty darn good. Borderline godlike, actually, and if you can throw a badass onto it, it becomes completely insane. Where their only option is to cross out to mitigate the damage. That's not true. They can grasp, but if they grasp, hey, whatever. Now I have a better sniff snip.
Yeah, and you still trade it up.
Right. Like they play grasp, they have to pull 1 to prevent this full payouts, and then we end up at range 4, which I like, and they took 5 and I took 2.
Right.
But that's pretty good. Good today. But yeah, so you being cornered, not the worst. You cornering the opponents, actually pretty awkward for you. You don't have space to make Scarecrow good. Love doesn't work. Mix is unimpressive because you can't escape sweep because the advance is going to put you at 1. Like the way you escape sweep is by missing, which meh, not very exciting. Thrust is not going to get its full payout except against focus. Funnily enough,
Right.
the only good card you have here is snip.
And maybe
Like,
bone crushing experiment, which is
if you have the gauge,
a risky
yes,
call out and is very gauge hungry anyway.
yeah. If you do have the gauge, then you have this, and then yeah, you can put them in the wheelchair. It's fine. But that and snip are basically all you have.
Right.
So even though most characters like corner their opponent and hate being cornered, for you, in my opinion, it's often kind of reversed, where you have way more impressive things to do here, where you don't have to worry about your opponents jumping out of range by any means, than you do here, where a bunch of your ranges stop, or a bunch of your attacks stop being safe because of how their ranges work.
Right.
That said, when I'm cornered not at range 1, my weird shaped kit tends to do decently well, where banana peel, and Harrington weights all offer some utility that they don't in other positions. Where, well, okay, that's not really true for mini past, but Huntington weight in particular pushes 1 but doesn't retreat, so I go to 4 instead of 5, which is actually usually much less awkward for me. Like I have a pretty solid kit at 4. Banana peel. Uh, I thought this was good. Hold on, is this good? I don't know. Something in my head says it's good, but I'm not so sure. I think I want it the other way. Yeah, there you go. That's a banana peel. Yeah, okay. So you want these here. And this one here. And then at range 1 or 4 or greater is where bomb works best, where, well, unless you're initiating. If you pull off top deck, then you're perfectly happy being at 2 and 3, so,
Right.
yeah. Anyway, again, apologies, this is kind of disorganized. I'm not the best at talking about positioning, I'm actually
No,
pretty bad at it.
not at all.
But I talked about your favorite ranges, the walls affect it. Play it, feel it out. I'm not the yeah, it's weird.
The the the
But
the, imp-
generally
the
1, 3,
impre-
4.
the impression that I'm getting is that like there's an initial uh learning curve to Faust where you're like getting used to all of his weirdness. And then once you're on the board with him, like for example, the idea of being cornered being beneficial to you is that I just put my monocle back in from before. It popped out again when you said that. But once you've gotten over that initial hump, when you try the tools here, they just kind of work, and they're kind of they
Mhm,
intuitively work once you get yourself into Faust brain. So like I feel
mhm.
like the advice of just kind of try different positions for Faust, because regular exceed logic and exceed positioning logic doesn't apply to him in the same way as it does for every other character, is probably solid advice to give somebody.
That might be the best way to put it, yeah. At least the best way I'm capable of putting it myself, right, which is by copying you saying that. Um, like, I think that probably works reasonably well. The advice that I should be giving, the advice that I'm actually tailored to giving is what a hand looks like that is a hand that you can play with.
That
Um
was where I was hoping you were going next, because this has been hanging over my head this whole time. Is like, what do you do when you get something that you can't deal with? How do I? Because I think maybe I'm better at positioning than I am at this part of the game.
That's only fair. I'm much worse at it. Um, so the hand curation, like begins at Mulligan. That's actually where you start playing. Not most characters don't have to think that much about Mulligan. In your case, you care a lot about what boosts are in your deck, so you care a lot about what boosts are in your hand.
Right.
You are almost always going to keep these 2 cards. That's because these boosts are the ones that are on that short list of things that can really screw you. Um, like you don't want to have these show up as a surprise on top of your deck. Um, so keep those in your opening hand if you get them. Most other things are workable in some form or fashion, but throughout the game, as you especially when you get into phases where you're playing neutral with your opponents, the stuff that you want to hang on to or hang on to as long as you can are the previously mentioned safety valve, the mix, the safety valve slash payout of thrust, where you are looking for a good opportunity, but you'll take acceptable ones if it's the only thing you have.
Right.
And then a hand that is kind of split between ranges, where you go, well, if I'm here at range 3, I want to have something that I'm comfortable striking with, like these 2 cards, and something I'm comfortable striking with if I go to range 1. Because your range, like, you are always lying to your opponent about your range. You need to always remember that you might be lying to yourself too.
Right.
Look at this and go, okay, I can throw away these cards that are, uh, for example, right? I'm changing cards. I'm going to get a stronger hand because I have, I don't know, these are engaged somehow. Don't ask me how. Um, the point is, the stuff that I want to keep is not necessarily the stuff that's good at my current position, like most people would. You want to keep a split because your position is not real. You want to keep something that is going to be good at the position that you might end up in, and something that is good at the position that you are in now, in case you don't.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, that my hard rule is never drop snip if you can help it because of how valuable this attack is as a threat. And then I love thrust. Um, but as long as you have something at 4, you don't necessarily need love, you don't necessarily need mix, you don't necessarily need dive. You just want, one of these at least. And then if you don't see something that works at range 1 or 2, well, start looking for that because you need to have a hand that can accommodate any range you might end up at based on whatever happens atop your deck. That way you can still use your ability with some amount of confidence, knowing that if it completely surprises my opponent and therefore their plans are overturned, it needs to be true that I'm not also completely surprised and overturns. Like I can be surprised and then go, oh yeah, right, I was ready for this.
I can work with
Let's
this
go.
because I've maintained a hand of options that work well enough.
Right. Because
Okay.
if you're able to do that, where your ability is never hurting you because you are, and I'm really harping on the range thing because I think that is by far the thing that is going to cause the most problems if you're not maintaining a hand with diverse effective ranges. Yeah, if you're making sure that you can consistently accommodate your ability, like it's not going to be a weakness. Then, especially after your next seed mode, it will become a pretty consistent strength. And your ability, when it's a strength, is really strong.
Right.
I see your hand and strike. You must wild swing at no cost to me. I didn't even throw away a focus from hand on this, let alone have to cancel it. Normally, this costs you a gauge and a
A
focus,
gauge
and
and a
it didn't
focus.
really cost
Right.
me anything.
Right.
And now I'm striking, and my attack is EX, and now I'm striking. Like things that cost other people resources
Or are
don't cost you
impossible.
anything,
Right. Like you
or
can't.
just impossible. Yes,
Yeah. You can't. No one else gets to do this.
yes. And I'm going to clarify. I think we made it clear it was possible. I'm going to explain how. By the way, usually, especially if you're just playing this on your turn, right? You want to name a card that you think the opponent has in hand that you don't want them to have in their hands. You'll name something like Focus or an Ultra, and go. Even if I have no idea what their hand is, or even what I want them to have in hand or not, those are valuable cards. Let's have them get rid of a Focus or a Sweep or an Ultra, whatever it is I don't want them to have. And that's still true if this comes off the top of your deck. But especially as you get toward late game, you can say, well, I'm going to name a thing that you don't have in your hands. I'm going to name Bone Crushing Excitement
Right.
when I'm playing against Soul Bad Guy.
A card you do not have. I'm gonna name 10 of clubs. The 52
Yeah,
card.
I will say the technically legal thing is to name an Exceed card,
Gotcha.
but it does not have to be a card in their kit. Now the mimetic thing is to name Exodia the Forbidden One.
Yes. Shout outs to
this
all my Yu-Gi-Oh fans out there.
Yes, this is a commonly accepted shorthand for I'm naming a card that we both know isn't in your deck.
Right. To make you reveal your hand.
Exactly. And when you play Parry on your turn, it's generally a bad idea to do this. It's almost always better to actually try to knock something out of your hand that would be good for them to have in hands, because the information alone is not that amazing. Because the information alone can now change, because the opponent will just change cards.
Unless you're
right?
striking. Right.
But if you do this and are striking at the same time, you know exactly what is in the opponent's hands.
Right.
I will point out one thing though. Don't assume this is completely don't assume this is a perfect plan, because you look at your opponent's hand, you go, I can beat every card in that hand with this. Then they wild swing, you
They
lose.
wild swing, of course, yeah.
Yes, like these two are kind of counterparts in that regard. You can see their whole hands, but they might still wild swing. You can force them to wild swing, but you don't know what they're wild swinging. Like neither of these are going to tell you what the top card of their deck is.
Right.
Be aware that a wild swing is something that is probably statistically unfavorable for them, but not guaranteed. So still play things that are good. Still play things that make sense.
Right.
Don't try to be incredibly irresponsible. But yeah, so that's if you want to guarantee that you see their hands, you can name a card that isn't in their deck to begin with.
Right.
If that makes you uncomfortable, then look for a card that has 2 copies down and name that one.
Right.
But that is how you do that with Parry.
I have a question about. I guess it's kind of a broad question. It's about like opportunism with Faust. In other guides, both with other folks and with UD, frequently we're talking about like this particular boost pairs incredibly well with this card. Save that for that combo. As Faust, you can't really do that. There are times like if you have snip 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 in your hand and you are advocating that I keep it in my hand, and then Badass comes up and I'm at range 1, there's very little reason to not mash it.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah, just do it. But a lot of times, I'm either not going to have snip, snip, snip in my hand, or I'm going to see Badass come down, or rather, I'm going to have Badass in my hand and not in my deck, or something like that. Sweep in my hand, not in my deck.
Yeah.
So I do need to kind of get away from like a canonical set of combos with Faust, because I don't have perfect control, right?
Right. That's why I've spoken in the generalities of like with Scarecrow, you often want to have one of the boosts that gives you power, one of the 2 EX boosts, or Mini Faust or Let's Rock, but especially Let's Rock.
Right.
And then there's a few things that make Snip 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 awesome. Mostly it's Mini Faust, but also Badass at range 1 especially. And then Thrust just being a really awesome card, but especially with Badass. I guess I should stop talking about Badass because it's going to make everything awesome. Badass just is good.
Right.
Anyway.
And I mean,
yeah, like I'm not.
That kind of speaks to my point about Badass in particular, is like I don't have the combo. I better use one of my other 6 combos, right?
Right. Yeah, you are able to play more aggressively. You're able to play neutral. You're allowed to play neutral once again. But your setup is going to be a little weaker than a character who is dedicated to being a setup character, because playing a boost every turn to make an awesome attack is not how your boosts work. They're
Right.
not that strong at doing that. What they're really strong at doing is saying, actually, this strike that's happening right now is not happening under the circumstances my opponent thought it was happening under. Either the position has changed, or some other shenanigan is happening, or I just have more cards in hands and have a
Right.
better chance at just playing an EX from hand, for example. So it requires you to be as adaptive to your play as your opponents, and the catch of that, of course, is that you're better at it.
Because
Is
you
that
can
you are looking at a hand and going, I have all these tools.
you can see your hand, right? Okay, and
Mhm.
you can control that. So the opportunism is like you don't want to be 20 steps ahead of your opponent. You want to be exactly one, and the one
Yes.
is that you can see your hand.
Yes.
Got it.
That's essentially correct. Like, you and when I play Faust, I tend to maintain a larger hand size than I do on a lot of characters because I think it's necessary.
Okay.
Like, if you don't have at least 5 cards in hand, it's way harder to use your ability because you can't maintain as strong a hand of things that will respond to anything that comes off the top of your deck. Um, Fortunately, he has a bunch of draws, so I don't tend to have to burn a lot of time drawing cards. I just play things that draw cards, and then that works. But
Okay. So you're consistently moving through your deck. You're not like going for like huge CC payouts unless you absolutely need to. Things have gone horribly wrong for you at some point. But you are maintaining pressure while maintaining a hand size so you can keep maintaining pressure.
right,
Okay.
and I favor these that are also positioning changes. Whoops. But I will, in a pinch, use this to buy myself time. Use this just to draw 2 cards and strike. Kind of the opposite. Or I'm not buying time. I'm buying cards, and I'm spinning gauge so I can strike right afterwards, probably.
Right. Right.
But yeah, like, I'm moving through a deck fairly steadily, not because I'm looking for a specific thing, but because I want to make sure I have a spread of things.
Right. Okay.
Uh, I need to be able to adapt to whatever my opponent's doing. And thanks to my general kit shape as Faust, I probably can. Like, I have these wide ranges. I have these pretty solid guard values in these, and some significant power values in these, and like that's enough to keep me stable most of the time. And
Right.
in other situations, I have gauge outlets that are very situationally useful. Very useful, very situational. Does
That makes sense. All
that make
right.
sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Um, anything else you want to cover uh about sort of like the macro Faust strategy? We have mini Faust. That was Maxi
Oh,
Faust.
yeah. There you go. Yes, Max. Oh, terrible. Um, I'm not sure. Like, I feel like this is kind of less guidance than I would normally give on your overall strategy and game plan, but that's part of how I think Faust works, is that you
Right.
are not necessarily playing the long game. You are playing the next turn or two,
The next
where you're
couple turns of
maintaining
the
a hand that
game.
will,
Yeah.
yeah, like, and you can play neutral, but if you're playing neutral, it's so that you can keep pace with your opponent, so you don't fall 2 steps behind. And
He
then when you're ready, you surge ahead.
so he's a grappler who's not a grappler who has a rush down deck composite or a rush down deck strategy and like the toolkit of a zoner.
Yeah, like, you have yeah, yeah. You have a zoning toolkit, you have grappler payouts, and you have, uh, I don't know, you have footsie's neutral, like, you have good neutral.
Right.
Um, so he's got good parts of every little archetype. Well, I guess not every little archetype. I'm sure you could name all kinds of them, but at least of those, he's got a bunch of different strengths.
That makes sense.
So
That seems like an incredible segue into how to deal with his
let's
weaknesses
talk
and
about
how to
weaknesses.
counterplay
Yes.
him. It's it's like you've done this before. Yeah.
um,
So
yeah.
at the end of these lessons, you've described all the Faust things. These are the Faust. This is the Faust tech. My opponent, maybe less so with Faust because he's kind of hard to get your head around at first. But my opponent should know what he's doing and is playing to stop him. What are they doing, and what is Faust doing to mitigate that counterplay?
Mhm. So, I'm gonna start with the cop out answer. Right. So the cop out answer is do your thing better.
Sure.
Um, then that's a standard thing you should always be trying to do, of course, but it's especially true against a lot of characters who are rushdown characters who don't do much to let you interact with them, where they're gonna do their thing. Some grapplers will also do this. Few zoners kind of, but usually there's more counterplay there. But the idea is, like, if this character isn't trying to stop you from doing your game plan, then do your game plan and just try to do it faster than they do theirs. And there's a lot of truth in that with Faust as well, because you can't stop this. It's going to happen. He plays a boost and he strikes. You can't do anything about that. It's just there's a boost in play now. Maybe he gets a badass snip at range 1. What do you do? You lose the strike. That's what you do. Like, okay, that's fine. That's going to happen. You need to win the rest of the time. Now, I say that if you're a character with your own solid boost kit, then playing a boost on your turn and making him go, well, I guess I can use this to break even, or I can play some neutral and kind of be a turn or half a turn behind, will make him feel kind of awkward. You can also, depending on what your character's preferred range is, make him uncomfortable with the board state. I'm not going to talk about positioning because I've clearly proven that I kind of can't, but I did say range 2 tends to be awkward for him. And depending on what you're better at, you probably have a better range than him, somewhere between 1 and 4. Because although he's stable at all those ranges, he's not exceptional at any of them.
Right.
Like, he's not amazing at 3. He's not amazing at 1 with the exception of this card. And if this card comes out and he initiated, you can still play Grasp in your next turn, and your worst case is eating a sweep.
Right.
By the way, if you do get Afroed, you will probably want to play Cross, because your worst case is Grasp, and you can back out of a sweep.
Right.
Like, that's often the thing that you kind of need to do. And if you can play a badass Cross, then you might just win the strike anyway. But that's a little more expensive.
But you
will,
weren't.
by the way,
But you weren't going to use that sweep on this turn anyway.
Right, like you got Afroed, you're not playing sweep.
Right.
But you will get Afroed at some point. Okay, that's fine. Like, make sure that you have something in your hand for when you get out. You don't lose the turn that you have an Afro on. You can still play the strike.
Right.
But yeah, the other oddity the one thing I will mention about positioning is he will very often move by 2. He will area shift you. He will push 1 and retreat, which is, creates 2 spaces. He will advance or retreat 2. Or oh, I lagged. There you go. Advance or retreat 2. Like, most of his movements, not all, but most of his movements, and especially, like, I'll say his favorite movements, are going to change the board by 2 in either direction.
Right.
That's a thing that you can keep in mind as you're evaluating what you need to have to answer his threats when he does a thing on his turn. Generally speaking, you won't have a lot of control over the board state because of how much you can manipulate it abruptly. But he also doesn't have perfect control over it. So, like, he's going to be, as I described earlier, splitting up his hand, which means he's probably not going to have an amazing hand at any given range. Play to whatever your strengths are in that situation.
That also might mean that my opponent, or Faust's opponent rather, could sort of stack their hand as well to, like, at least have something to answer with if suddenly Faust is over here instead.
Right.
Rather than have nothing but range 1 tools all the time because you chose this range, Faust. Clearly you want to brawl here. Well, no, you chose this range for a second and you'll be gone in a minute.
Yeah. That is the if you have a reasonably flexible kit, then looking at the spaces he can move to with a difference of 2, where at 1 you go, okay, I need to make sure I have a 3 option. Or something to do if he does that for some reason, which he probably won't, but he could.
Right.
Like, that is a thing you can do. I also think that, but if you are more specific about what your favorite range is, you can just build a strong hand for that, and then wait for an opportunity. Like, wait for that to come up. Like, if his range is going to change, not entirely under his control, he will eventually jump back to 3, and then you can unload your awesome range 3 hand that you've been waiting for.
Right.
Like, you can't rely on it happening at a given time, so don't hold off on doing anything else during that period of time. But be perfectly willing to have a awesome range X card, or cards, if it's an EX check, knowing that he's going to actually go from range Y to range X at some point.
Right.
Like, you can take advantage of his own unpredictability that way, because that's the last thing he wants. Let's see. Any specific card things? Yeah, focus is the thing you kind of need to deal with a proper Scarecrow payouts. It is a really good card, and so you'll often want to play a focus against everything. But if you aren't somebody who has a lot of movement or a lot of long range tools, then you don't want to be in a position where you have nothing to do except die. So hold a focus for Scarecrow if you aren't somebody that can keep up with his movement. He dislikes dealing with opposing speed boosts. He really, really dislikes it. If you have any kind of speed boost, those can mess him up pretty severely. This is because you can do things like +2 speed dive, and now nothing in his kit will do anything about that.
Right.
Um,
A
let's
speed
see.
boost could also conceivably mess with some of his double-edged boosts, where sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad
Yeah,
ways. But you
if
can
if you, I probably should mention that. If you put a speed boost out, he's not terribly unlikely to put this out and say, "Okay, go faster than me, I dare you." At which point, your job is to be in range where you can play Spike, Dust. Excuse me.
right.
Um, discard. Because now this is a thing where you go, well, if you played a thing that's lower than it, I squish you. If you played a thing that's faster, then we probably trade even, because most things not that are faster than this are going to be dealing 4 or 3 damage, and so I'll take maybe 1 damage more than you, if that. But like if you have a speed boost, that's a speed 5 or speed 4 or 5 spike dust. My gosh, um, yeah. Probably hitting for 5. Maybe you take 3 damage, but if you were faster than him, that means you stunned something like a block, a focus, a sweep. You're pretty happy about that.
Right.
Um, uh, Figuring out what you can play when these are out is just generally going to be a mix-up. I kind of have to leave it to you to play that. This is, as I described previously, a race to go slower, where if you decide that you're just going to play the block, you are at risk of him getting a bunch of free value. If you're anywhere other than like range 4, where okay, he can hit you with the 6 power love, but you played a block. No one's excited about that. And then this is the range isn't real, but only for the faster player, which tends to do some very awkward things. This
Right.
also interacts in a weird way with the corner, because if you're here and you play a focus and he plays a cross, well, he's going to advance 1 and then run away.
Right.
Right. Uh, and
And
then this
and
goes
and
away.
and you can't really play across unless you are really betting on him playing grasp and beating it, I guess, because then you'll advance 1 and not run anywhere.
Yeah, your cross sucks, but his cross is awesome because
Right.
of this, how this situation interacts with
Yeah.
the banana peel /
So
dome. Um,
these boosts are essentially impossible to give comprehensive advice on, because it's not just character specific, it's not just board state specific, it's like deck composition
it's
in the moment specific. It's way too granular.
yeah, yeah, it's yes.
So
Um,
the advice then is, if you're fighting Faust, take these cards and look at your kit and see what happens with them, because we can't tell you.
yep. If I wanted to give one general piece of advice, it would be at range 1, at least you only have one really important mix-up threats to worry about, which is snip.
Right.
If you manage to call the snip mix-up successfully, not to be confused with the mix snip-ups, then sorry.
No, that was great.
Sorry.
You get one. I made you groan earlier. You get one. You get one. It's only fair.
All right. Anyway, if you manage to call both of these when they come out, when or if they come out, then at range 1, you're probably just stronger than him,
Right.
because he's not really amazing other than this. He does, like, thrust does not do 7 at range 1 in most cases. Mix only really works if he initiates at range 1, or at least it's only reliable in that case. And these are between bad and mediocre. So like that's a and if you have unusually fast buttons, or if you have a bunch of speed boosts, that also is another reason for range 1 to be good for you. But range 1 makes these easier to deal with, because it narrows the mix up to, okay, I can still just kind of play a block or a focus, and I'm not going to lose that badly, except against this.
And I was gonna lose that bad against this in range 1 anyway with those cards.
Yeah, you don't want to take the loss against Snip Snip Snip. It's probably going to happen eventually. If winning this mix-up is going to give you a massive advantage in the game overall, because you are expecting not to win this mix-up most of the time.
Right.
He's very, very good at enforcing it.
Right.
Let's see, anything else? Late game situations, if he has 4 gauge, be aware that bone crushing exists, and that's very often going to be a situation where you can have a payouts that you're threatening that he will play this to avoid and not hit you, and that's a win for you. Like if he plays bone crushing and it hits you, you die. But if you can be in a situation where he knows that you're going to throw something fast, he has to play this, but you're not at range 3 or 4, that's good for you. Like
That,
getting him to waste those resources is great.
yeah, that diffuses his worst case. That means he can't play neutral as well with his cancelable boost in the next couple of turns as the game closes out.
Yeah, like what you don't want is for him to comfortably do this
Right.
because now he has a significant neutral advantage over you. Um, but yeah. Yeah, so generally, despite me saying that range 2 is his least favorite range, you will have an easier time parsing his effects, and especially the double-edged stuff, if you are hanging out at range 1. So as you are learning him and how to play against him, might be less overwhelming to just try to stick close to range 1 against him, and accept that you will lose the snip eventually.
Sure.
Um,
And he definitely
and then
in
when you lose the
general
snip, yeah,
he seems like the
good.
kind of character that the first time you play Faust, you might take a loss. He also seems like the first time you encounter a good Faust, you might have no idea what's going on and you might take a loss. Like
Mhm.
I don't get discouraged about that. Basically, he's a weirdo, and
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
develop
just keep rolling.
counterplay. You can develop a line of play for him, but it's gonna be a second before everything clicks for you on either side of the table with Faust. It seems like.
Yeah, and because he, like, fundamentally is more about mix-ups than a lot of boost characters, that's that grappler I love so much.
Right.
Like, playing against the same opponent is gonna teach you what they are doing. Like, you can figure out what a particular player's preferences are, what mix-ups they want to run. Like, I've already told you mine. I'm gonna play this attack. I'm gonna make it hit for 8 if I possibly can.
Right.
Um, you know that about me. You're not gonna see me throw a banana peel cancel, probably ever. And everybody's gonna have their own little quirks like that where you can yeah, so maybe not in one game, but you can get the hang of how each person tunes his particular tools because there's a lot of different ways to kind of different directions to take this character.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a lot of it is going to come down to mix-ups. So you will have to learn your opponent as far as that goes, and then use your best tools to enforce whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that is, I mean, at least one way writ super large that you can interpret the game of Exceed is that it's a game about mix-ups. Um,
Mhm.
it's also a game about hand management and deck composition. And as Faust, you will
Yes.
also need to know how to do that. So he is,
Resource management.
he's using every part of the engine, and in order to be good with him, you need to be pretty good with every part of the engine.
Mhm. And he may well make you better with it, with each part of it as you get the hang of him more.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
he not have a very resource game, but as you play him more, you will realize how specific resources matter, where you go, "Well, I actually needed to keep both copies of whatever because of this particular opponent." Like, you learn as you go.
Faust as a teaching tool. I like it.
Yeah.
All right.
And he is not the least approachable character in this, at least not in my opinion. I actually think he's yeah,
Yeah,
not super hard to play.
I would not have agreed with you prior to the conversation we just had, but and maybe this is sort of to the point of it, but like he makes sense to me now. Like that is a maybe a bad sign for my mental health that that our boy here is really talking some
Yeah.
sense. But
I mean, Faust is not Arcane. He is not incomprehensible, and he's not designed to be incomprehensible. He's somebody who will all over the screen, and maybe range isn't real, maybe position isn't real.
right,
But what he is playing at its core is the same game fundamentally that you are playing. Well,
right.
assuming maybe you're not. I don't know. Maybe you're
Assuming you're
Arcane.
not playing Arakune
Oh,
yourself or another character who doesn't really play Exceed, that's actually super good to remember, though. That as weird as he may seem, what is at
he is still
the
fundamentals oriented at
yeah
the end of the day.
what is at the bottom of all of this, all these layers of weird obfuscation and weird kind of jokes in some cases, like practical jokes on your opponent, is an Exceed character.
Mhm.
Got it. That
Yep.
makes sense. All right.
Good, strong fundamentals
Yeah.
and
Uh,
afros.
and afros, of course. I would say then, D, that we have met the brief. We have taught the people how to play Faust. Um, thank you so much, as always, for your time and your expertise. I really appreciate it as
Yeah.
always. Cannot wait to give this guy a try and see if I can wrap my head around him. Hopefully, people at home feel the same way. I hope that in addition to learning something, you've you've
Mhm.
found a character that vibes with you, because I think he he looks way more unapproachable than he really is, and I think a lot of people will enjoy playing him.
Yeah, before we actually wrap up and close down, I think we used to do a thing where we talked about other characters you may like if this appeals to you.
Yeah,
Can we talk
yeah,
briefly about that?
please do. Yeah.
Yeah, so, if you like this premise of I've got wild boosts where they're coming off the top of my deck, but you are not so sure about a lot of these play patterns or a lot of this, I need to be well, okay, let me just pull up Platinum, here you go.
Right.
Yeah, we made reference to this character earlier because Platinum is another character who kind of boosts off the top of her deck, and even has some sustain boosts effects. She has considerably more control in various places throughout her deck, where she can put things on top of her deck and decide that that's what she's boosting with. Um, and her ability triggers each strike instead of as an action on her turn, which is the other huge difference. Platinum is considerably more of a she tends to have far less impressive payouts, but she can do a lot of them.
Right.
Um, she does not hit you for 7 or 8. Um, not generally. But yeah, but she has the same kind of she is going to be throwing a boost in play a lot of the time. She gets a little more time to respond with it because it's not going to happen on her turn. It's going to happen at the end of a strike. But she can do it even on defense, and she can do it every strike. So uh, that's wanted to note that as another wild booster. I think I can accurately say the other wild booster.
Mhm.
Um, if you like I am boosting and striking. There's 2 characters. And by the way, for those playing in Prince, apologies for pulling out characters that you probably can't get anymore. Street Fighter is not that easy to find these days, so I'm told.
Yep.
But the after you play, Resolve is just when it enters play. But after you play continuous boost, you can strike. Hey, look, you get to boost and strike.
Yep.
Cool.
It's coming from hand, and the boosts are different, and resource management feels very different between the two. But there's a lot in
Yes.
common between their play pattern.
Yeah, like if you fundamentally want to do the thing of I'm putting 2 pieces together, and if maybe you're intimidated by not knowing what one of them is, then Sea Viper lets you put 2 things together that both come from your hands, where you know the combination you're getting. You're not gonna just randomly show up somewhere. Also, Sea Viper boosts are not generally going to move you, or generally, excuse me, they're not going to move you. She
Right.
just does not have movement on her continuous boosts at all.
Right.
She does not do instant boosts. You're not going to do the parry shenanigan this way. That's also true with Platinum. These do not do instant boosts. They only do continuous. Um, but if you like having plus power now strike, Sea Viper might be your girl. Um, Jacko. Well, if you have access to Faust, there's a good chance you have access to Jacko. For some reason. Also likes to play a boost and strike. Also does it from hands like Sea Viper. Pays a force for the pleasure, and has a very different boost suite and a very different attack suite from Sea Viper. Jacko has more Zoner blood. Sea Viper has more Rushdown blood. There definitely is Rushdown blood in Jacko. There's not Zoner blood in Sea
No.
Viper. And Jacko has generally a more stable boost suite to just play from hand, where she has things like speed and armor and range that she could just kind of play, and they will just work.
So
Uh,
she's less overtly goofy than Faust is.
yes, she does not have double edge boosts. Her boosts
Right.
are good.
Right.
Um, her attacks are also not going to hit for 7 or 8s, generally speaking. But she's very good at making them hits. She also makes bank on normals. Her actual defining feature, I should mention, I guess. See, Viper's defining feature is just what I described, because her exceed ability is more of the same. You get a big reload, and then you keep striking, and also you get crits, which is a Street Fighter mechanic I'm not going to talk about here, because it's not about a Street Fighter.
Sure.
Platinum defining feature is what I described. She plays boosts at the top of her deck. She eventually will get more control over them if you choose to exceed. That's another matter. And is also a time limited thing. Man, I keep bringing up other season mechanics anyway. uh, Jacko's defining feature actually is pretty different when she exceeds, which is that boosts that are in her, or cards that are in her gauge, become an area from which she can boost, which means that you gain not just a hand of boosts, but an extra hand of boosts. Did we do a Jacko guide?
We haven't, but we're going to, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. All right. Well, cool. We'll talk more about that later. But yes.
That's called a
So
plug, ladies and gentlemen.
there you go. Just as plans. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Anyway, yeah. If you like the boost and strike dynamics, if you like wild boosts, or some combination thereof, consider these. Okay, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And
Mhm.
hopefully, if you already are an adherent to these characters and feel like giving Faust a try after that, I think it makes a lot of sense to you. And if this is your first time in playing Exceed and you love Faust, we've got a couple more for you that'll scratch a similar itch.
Mhm.
Yep. Well, D, this has been absolutely wonderful as always. I can't wait to do it again. I can't wait to take what I've learned and go try it out. Hopefully, people at home feel the same. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
My pleasure. I had a blast.
And people at home, thank you so much for your time and your attention. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Oh, stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated, please.
Mhm. Bye.